Hello and welcome to another iGIE video podcast. This is your host, Dr. Vivek Kaul. I'm professor of medicine at the University of Rochester Medical Center, and I'm also associate editor for the Insights section of the ASG journal iGIE, which is Innovations in Gastrointestinal Endoscopy. And today I have the great pleasure of having as our guest Dr. Christopher Thompson, who is professor of medicine at the Brigham and Women's Hospital in Boston, Massachusetts, as part of the Harvard Medical School. Welcome, Chris. Today our topic will be mentorship in advanced endoscopy. Welcome, Dr. Thompson. And you and I have talked about this before. Thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks very much for having me, Vivek. I think it's a very exciting topic, and I'm looking forward to spending some time with you today.
Thanks. You have trained so many students and trainees over the years, including traditional fellows and others who have swung by your unit, and it's a long and very rich experience, getting engaged with all levels of trainees. But one of the questions that naturally comes to mind is, what were your beginnings? How were you attracted to endoscopy, and what was the reason you got involved with this space?
Well, I think that I've always liked doing things with my hands, since I was young. So I like the technical kind of aspects of advanced endoscopy. Whether it's fixing a motorcycle or just kind of doing something mechanical, I always enjoyed that. But the other thing that's quite nice about endoscopy is that you get to treat patients and see the results pretty quickly, right? A lot of times with medical therapies, the effects take longer to see, right? So, and I think that with endoscopy, a lot of times, whether you're pulling a stone out of a bile duct to relieve cholangitis or, something along those lines, treating achalasia with a POEM, you see those results pretty quickly. And that's very gratifying. And I think that, I've always kind of enjoyed that aspect of endoscopy.
Well, that's good to know, and that makes sense to me. Tell us a little bit about you've been a mentor to so many, but who were your early mentors, and what type of lessons did they give you, or what were the main principles that you imbibed from them?
Yeah. So I was fortunate to have, I think as we all do, we have kind of various mentors that were very important to me at different points in time in my career. And I think that, very early on, I had is just starting kind of as a fellow moving into faculty. David Carlock and Bill Brugge were two of my closest mentors, right? And they both kind of were different. And keep in mind, when you have mentors, some mentors are teaching you technical, things, how to do procedures. Other mentors are teaching you more about how to build your career, and others are teaching you about research, maybe. And so there's, they all kind of have different roles. But David Carlock and Bill Brugge were very kind of different mentors, in that Bill Brugge is from learning procedures, right? Bill Brugge would give you a lot of freedom, especially with ERCP. With EUS, he was more hands-on, but he gave you a lot of freedom with ERCP and let you kind of, figure things out a little bit. And then if you were having problems, he'd step in. Whereas David Carlock was more hands-on in that training, but you learned so much from both of them and both of those styles that it was a perfect marriage for me, really, because we go back and forth from the Brigham to the Mass General in our training every 3 months. And so it was great to kind of have both of them as mentors teaching me how to do procedures. And then when I kind of became junior faculty, I joined the Brigham side, and David Carlock was amazing as a mentor then, because he would let you kind of, really develop your skill set. And it was a safe place to do it, because I knew I could push the envelope, do things that I was not comfortable with, really just on the edge of being comfortable. And he was always there to back you up if you had a problem. I remember several times when I kind of, as junior faculty, when you're pushing the envelope, you're getting into, complicated situations, where he came in the room and, bailed me out and helped me out. And it was so valuable learning. So a lot of times, you do a lot of learning during fellowship, but those first few years out are so formative, and you need good mentorship, I believe, as junior faculty. And then he provided that to me. And then from a career standpoint, I had another mentor, Don Bain, who was a cardiologist. And he was part of a program at Harvard called CIMIT, which basically was geared up to help you obtain Department of Defense funding and grants, right? So he taught me how to write grants and really built out my millions and millions of dollars. I think of research funding was really due to his mentorship and him helping me. So I had, several multi-million-dollar grants out of the Department of Defense early in my career, which is really instrumental to my success and was really very helpful. And then he went on to be the chief medical officer and chief technology officer at a corporate level for Boston Scientific. And he was just a wonderful mentor as well. So, very important people to me, and really helped me develop my career.
Well, that's very nicely summarized. Long early forays in this space, and all the giants that were obviously instrumental in shaping your career. And you mentioned a couple of things there that struck me, is the different styles that different mentors may have, right? And that's very influential in shaping you and making you very wholesome. And then the second point that struck me was that not always do your mentors need to be, or that your mentors are from the same specialty. Sometimes they're not even from medicine. So I think it's important for us to keep an open mind and gain insights and valuable wisdom from sources wherever they may come from. But that was an important learning lesson for those who are listening in.
And that's a good point. Not even medicine sometimes, because as you know, I'm also an entrepreneur, and I have several startup companies over the past, 10 or 15 years. And I was really fortunate at DDW to run into one of my mentors when it came to being an entrepreneur and doing startup companies. And
Right.
I was, after a presentation I gave at DDW as an advanced fellow, this venture capitalist walked up to me and said, "Hey, I'm really interested in the GI space and in obesity, and would you be interested in doing a startup company with me?" And I didn't have an MBA,
Right.
but he really taught me, and his group taught me everything I needed to know
Yeah.
about how to do startup companies.
Yeah.
And that was incredible. And that first company, we never funded or to get off the ground. It was
Right.
like a
Right.
6-month mini MBA, and it was amazing and really valuable.
No, that's key. I think some of the principles, and especially in this particular discussion, these thematic reviews and conversations and papers that we intend to delve into for advanced endoscopy trainees and those who have dedicated their lives to this profession in this space. It's a specialized area where you're innovating and being creative and really need to think on your feet all the time. These are complex cases. You're using complex devices. The technology has evolved so rapidly. So I think these experiences early on, being open to these type of dialogues and learning from various sources, is one of the key principles for success in this space. Life is very unpredictable in the interventional endoscopy profession, so one has to be open to that. So these are all points that speak to those sentiments. Now, in terms of endoscopy training, tell me, how long have you been formally training and mentoring endoscopy fellows?
Since 2004, so it's been a while, right?
So
Almost
2
20
decades, a
years.
long time. Long
Almost
time.
20 years,
And
yeah.
so, obviously your practice has evolved in that time. Do you segregate your time periods in training and mentorship in different parts, or have you always done all the similar type of procedures? Was it EUS, ERCP more in the beginning and then got into bariatrics? Or tell the audience a little bit about how that the natural flow came about in your evolution in both learning and training, please.
Yeah. So in Boston, it's very competitive, right? We have several big hospitals all around us, and they're all trying to do ERCP and EUS. So
Right.
when I came out of training, I kind of took a different tact. And again, with the help of my mentors, I went after notes, right? Which was natural orifice transluminal endoscopic surgery. So, and those grants allowed me to have a very big animal lab. So I was doing very aggressive, taking gallbladders out through the mouth type stuff right out of fellowship, because I was able to get those grants early on. And then what happened was that technology and kind of those procedures evolved into endoluminal surgery. So really, very early on, I was always doing ERCP and EUS, but I was like, we were one of the first to do necrosectomy, right? We always were doing, even in training, I learned from David Carlock how to do Zenker's procedures. But we were doing cadaveric kind of poem work well before the first in-human publications, right? So we were very early with all of that stuff, whether it's poem, G-poem, any of the third space work. ESD, again, we were doing ESD heavily in 2005 with all sorts of new technology, reverse phase polymers for better lifting, R-scope for dissection, different tools provide traction, et cetera. So that notes work really kind of ended up helping develop these endoluminal surgical procedures. And then obesity work was right there. I mean, I did my first cases in bariatric endoscopy with endoscopic weight loss procedures in 2003. And so I patented the concept when I was a fellow for endoscopic weight loss. And that was probably 2002, 2003 when I patented that. And then we got methods patents and claims granted. And that was great because then companies had to work with us because they wanted that methods patent. And so we started right in 2003, 2004 doing these procedures. And so from the beginning, I was always teaching that. But my mentoring from the beginning was in 3 buckets, right? It was, I ran something called the Developmental Endoscopy Lab at Harvard, which I still have, where we assess new technologies and we develop new technologies. Right. And from there, we spin out companies, right? So I have a group of mentees from the very beginning to this day that are more kind of part of that innovation lab, if you will, the developmental endoscopy lab. Right. And then I have another group of fellows that are more clinical, which are part of the bariatric endoscopy, as well as endoluminal foregut surgery training. Right. And then we also have those that do traditional ERSP in the US. And you mentioned them in different ways, obviously, right? Actually, you know what? I could probably share my screen because I have pictures of these fellows. Let me see if I can find it. This is from the innovation lab, right? Or the developmental endoscopy lab. And you can see very early on, we have people like Mihir Wag, who he's done some amazing work, right? In Colorado and now down at Mayo, right? Ben Merrifield, 2004, 2005. Ben Merrifield went into private practice, but he's head of the innovation SIG, and he's had successful startup companies. Right. Linda Lee joined me at the Brigham and is director of endo. All of these people are very successful. Marvin Hughes, head of innovation at the Brigham now. Many of these are engineers, so they're not doctors. You might not know about them. He's a professor at Cork. But then we have others very active in the ASG as well, like Keith Opstein, right? And he's an engineer as well, right? Yeah, so, right. He does some NIH grants, and he's doing some great work. We have Dan Azaguri is interesting. He's a surgeon that runs the Stanford Biodesign program from a surgery side now, and he's also the head of MIS surgery at Stanford. Barham Abadaya at Mayo Clinic is, again, he's kind of head of innovation there. Yes. You can see kind of down the list. Now, some people do both. Like he also did bariatric endoscopy with me, right? Right. Aside European, you did bariatric endoscopy as well. Kevin Woods, many of these people, either director of endoscopy, they've gone on to do other things as well, but they've all spent time in innovation. And Andy Storm actually heads up, I think, the biodesign program or something at Mayo Clinic as well. And so kind of exciting. Very nice group of folks. Very amazing legacy there. And I personally know many of these folks, including Andy, the one you last mentioned, is actually running the lab that Dr. Gostout had kind of pioneered there, and is doing great work there. And I've had the great pleasure of working with him in that lab as well. So that's an amazing legacy, Chris. And they're phenomenal. And then the second group is bariatric endoscopy or foregut surgery people. Right. And so you can see there's some overlap because some of them would spend time in the developmental endoscopy lab first, right? And others just kind of did really hardcore bariatric training. And Ravindra Watson out at Cedars and Barham again here, and then some pediatric folks at Dartmouth. She's at Dartmouth, and then we have Wasif at Baylor and Ali Schulman at Michigan, and a lot of these have now moved on to be directors of endo. Like she's a director of endo at Michigan. Andy's director of endo at Mayo. I think Barham's moving on to be director of endo as well, and you see this in many cases. So very exciting, and it's nice, but again, kind of different paths, different ways of mentoring people. Absolutely. That's I'm glad that you kind of
helped explain this in the bucket format so that people have a good understanding of the various pipelines, so to speak, where trainees, have been able to benefit from, spending time with you.
I think
And
there's one other group, which is advanced endoscopy, and this is kind of
mhm,
interesting because it shows you those two groups. I spend a lot of time with those people, like years in
mhm.
developing their career, right? Whereas with advanced endoscopy, people come and go pretty quickly,
Right,
and this is where
right,
I'm part of the lineage of maybe David Carlock and Bill Brugge, right? So,
right, right.
like here, I was a fellow in line here when many other folks, whether it was Adam Slifka and
Right.
yeah, and Royce Techno.
Yeah, Mike.
There's a lot of them. Yeah,
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 exactly. Mike
yeah.
Wallace, and we
I see
have
Brian Jacobson there as well.
Ryan, yeah, right,
So
and
that's
several,
and yeah, you
John
got
Paneros. There's
yeah,
so many incredible people here, right? David
really is.
Lichtenstein,
Yeah,
Roy Wong, lots of folks there, and it's kind of like a family tree in a sense, right?
yeah,
And then
yeah,
and then
absolutely.
uh and then I kind of eventually took over, but there's people here that I just played. I wasn't really the primary mentor for these people. It was really David
Right,
Carlock, whether it was
right.
Vikesh Singh, and these guys have all been directors of endo all places too,
Correct,
like Hopkins, I
correct.
don't know, like Sinai, Wash U, and then
Mm-hmm.
and then we have the editor of Video GIE here, Field
Mm-hmm.
Willingham. He's director of endo down at Emory, I believe, and then again, several others, but I
It's
think
amazing.
that yeah, Patrick Yahimsky is director of endo down at
In
Vanderbilt. So
Vanderbilt.
yeah,
Yep.
so now I wasn't their primary mentor, right? But I just kind of mentored them doing cases. So you do your part. So in a lot of times
Correct.
it takes a team of people to properly mentor someone, which I think is really important. And that's what we have now as a team mentoring folks.
Yeah, I think
And
as programs grow, and by the way, amazing legacy. Thanks for sharing that. And I don't know that too many 4-hour platforms that such a history lesson can be had. But I think this will be a treat for the viewers, should they decide to log in. I think it does take a team. It takes a village, and I think as programs grow, it is pretty natural for different people to be doing different things and for the trainee to be able to partake from the entire experience there. I do believe, I'm like you, a little bit old school. I think it falls on the trainee. The onus is on the trainee to seek out as much as they can get from their workday and from that year or two of fellowship that they have time with you on. So that was great. Obviously, Chris, the legacy that you had, that you came into, and that you further built on, a lot of the folks that you showed here and that we know of have gone into academic work. Is it possible, let's say, I guess the trainees will be wondering at this point in the conversation, could thriving careers be had in the private sector and obviously in collaboration with industry? I know you alluded to some examples. That's a possibility. We've had a few people who went out and did equally well in the non-academic sector.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that's very important, right? I mean, we do train leaders in advanced endoscopy that stay in academics, but I think that the private sector, whether it be just going into private practice,
Hmm.
working for other private hospitals, or doing stuff closer work with industry, is very important, and you can get very fulfilling career and actually move the field forward from there as well. I mentioned Ben Merrifield doing startups. He's in private practice on the West Coast. Others like Austin Chang, he basically started off a little bit in academics down at Thomas Jefferson. He has a toe in there, but he then moved on to be the chief medical officer, with Medtronic, which is very exciting, and that's
Yes,
fulfilling. And he's really helping drive the field forward on the industry side as well, right?
it's true.
And so, yeah,
Yeah,
and he
and he
he
was
was
just recognized as a top 25 healthcare influencers just yesterday. It was announced. So
just
that's
phenomenal,
it's
right?
quite an
And he's doing
amazing.
amazing.
He is doing very well. And I think those are good examples for people because this question comes up always. And, as the traditional silos have been built around, innovation and complex work, primarily limited to the ivory towers. But I do believe that the world has changed and there are many, many, many hybrid models of excellent clinical work that is done outside the traditional academic building. So I think there is something there to look forward to in terms of career pathways for our future trainees. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and ask you a couple of questions which are a little bit more direct, and maybe you can speak to that. So as a mentor, what are the qualities and attributes that you feel are really, really important if somebody is taking on, the mantle of being an advanced endoscopy mentor? What are the attributes you feel are really essential?
Uh, well, that's a tough question. I think that you need to be thinking about the mentee's career and their development in a selfless way, right? And I think that's the hard part in many ways, right? Because you want them to succeed, and you need to think of it from their perspective and what's going to help them succeed. And everyone's different, right? I think that you don't want to fit someone into a certain mold that is not, not them, right? So you want to use, it's like kind of like a ball of clay, right? But it's not, because it has certain tendencies as well, right? And it wants to be shaped a certain direction in a way, right? So for instance, if someone's not good at statistics, you don't want to slow their progress down by making them do statistics, right? You want them to still be able to publish and learn procedures and whatnot. So you give them the help they need. So you pair them with someone who's really good in statistics, and then together they can be very productive and work very quickly, right? So it's like kind of being flexible as well. I think it's important to be flexible with a person and try to communicate with them. You want to find out kind of really what, and then hopefully they know. But a lot of times they kind of might not have an idea what they want to do, right? But hopefully, first of all, you want to encourage them to figure out really who they are and what they want to accomplish, near term and long term. And then you got to help them get there, right? And then you also have to kind of understand their skill sets and kind of what they're naturally good at. And I mean, maybe they want to become better at something that they're not naturally good at. That's fine too. It just takes more time, right? And if that's what they really are passionate about, you got to help them do that as well. But I think it's being flexible, right? And putting the time in, really, because some people take longer than others, and just because someone isn't quick at learning something doesn't mean they're not going to be phenomenal. Some of our mentees that were the hardest to train have become technically the best, and they're also some of the best teachers, right? And other people that are really easy to train, a lot of times they kind of peak early and then they don't keep going. But then other people that are easy to train they do just skyrocket. So you can't really tell, right? So I think it's just important, it's important to kind of stick with them. And the other thing is, mentoring is not just teaching a procedure, or teaching them how to do some research or helping with a publication. I think it's the long-term plan of getting them in the right position, right? If you noticed, our mentees have directors of endo positions in almost pretty much all the major institutions, right? And that's not an accident, and it doesn't happen by chance. Before the person even joins us, we start calling around to the programs and saying, hey, what do you need at your program? So we find out where the fellow wants to go, very early on, if they want to be in Texas or Florida or Michigan or wherever. Find out where they want to go. We start calling the programs in the area and find out what skill sets they need. And then we see if the mentee is kind of interested in developing those skill sets. So, I mean, they might need colon ESD at Michigan, right? And then, we already have 2 former trainees in Michigan. One's directing endoscopy, so that helps out, right? So then you figure out, okay, you really want to go to Michigan? You want to learn colon ESD? And then you kind of shape that, and then you can help steer them into that career path. And then you can help launch them too, because then we're also part of that negotiation with that institution, right? If we're training someone to do colon ESD, they don't have anyone doing colon ESD there, they should go on as the director of that, right? And they should have protected time and whatnot. So I think that you have to have the long game in mind and really try to help that fellow launch their career, because as I said, the first few years out after they leave the nest, those first few years are going to be really important to them. So the best we can do is help them be in the best kind of most fertile soil to grow. And I think that's something that mentors need to think about as well.
So I know that was that answer covered so many brilliant points. I think it's important, especially for the young mentors in the field, who are certainly within first 5 years of their own graduation, but even up to 5 to 10 years out, it's important to know that it's not just a procedural based or a commitment to skill set transference. It's a commitment for life almost, and certainly setting up the trainee for success in their early years. It's customizing all of those elements to the trainee's benefit. So this could be a podcast in itself, but I think you covered most of the high points. In return, of course, the mentee has some attributes, some responsibilities, some duties. What are the main attributes you're looking for in a mentee? And I suspect, without giving away your recipe, what are those things that attract you to a mentee in an interview? So, like, who do you pick? Why do you pick them? What are you looking for in a mentee? What should they be doing?
Well, we have a kind of a committee that helps select the fellows, right? And I think that's good because we all think a little differently.
Correct.
And I think that's been very helpful in us, really picking top-notch trainees.
Right.
And I think that we're looking for several different things. You want a track record of someone working hard. There's no way around working hard, right? You've got to work hard.
Yeah.
Especially for advanced endoscopy. If they're coming in for 1 year, right? This is not a 9 to 5 proposition. We're going to come out to be an excellent endoscopist, right?
Correct.
I think that they have to show that they have an appetite for working hard, in making the most of that 1 year. I think also you want them to be a compassionate, caring person. I think that that's going to be really important as they take care of our patients, because they have to provide good care for our patients. And I think they have to be compassionate and caring to do that, and do that well. So that's the next thing. I think that beyond that, those two major things, I think there's a lot of wiggle room, right? I don't think you need someone that says, I want to go into academics and be the next, whatever. That's less important to us, right? I think that, because they can, I do want them to have a desire to help move the field forward in some way.
Correct.
And they can do that in private practice. They can do that in academics. They can do that in many different ways. Like Austin is doing it in
the social realm.
Social realms with social media for sure, but also on the other side, the dark side, if you will, being an industry, right? I mean, I don't want to say the dark side, but I think that many people view it that way, right? But there's so many ways to develop, right? So I think that we have to be open-minded to the rest of it. But if they're really interested in working hard,
I think that you spoke to my heart. I think the work ethic is extremely important. I want to say this here, like, all of medicine is an area where sincerity of purpose is the number one attribute, right? So when the patients are subjecting themselves and their life and their whole being to your care, sincerity of purpose, trust, the ability to be transparent, work hard, and be true to the cause, I think are more appealing as a candidate than some claim of lofty aspirations of academics or otherwise. As we have just said, it's very possible and actually welcome to be successful in any pathway. That's not what you're looking for in the interview. So I think be real and state your case as plainly as you can, and be willing to work hard. And I think, like you mentioned about the track record, I think references, and it's a small world we are in, right? It's ever expanding, but the world of advanced endoscopy can be shrunk down to a phone call. So it's important to have a good track record and be a good citizen coming into these positions, because word travels around fast, and I think good reputations precede you and get the job done for you. Would you agree with that, Chris?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that, how do you determine how hard someone works and how compassionate they are, right? And it's talking to their current mentors and kind of their colleagues. And so, and it is a very small community. So I think that, it's tricky sometimes, but I think that's really the surrogates. Now, a lot of times we use publication track record as working hard, right? So if someone's published a lot, then they're working outside of hours to do that, right? And so that's another way to kind of get an idea. But it's kind of hard sometimes.
Right, but I like the committee setup. I think we certainly have that for our general endoscopy fellowships, and most certainly should be the case for these as well. Another aspect that comes up a lot, especially in recent years with so much technology and emphasis on procedures and innovation, how we agree that cognitive skill sets are equally important to impart. Are there any special efforts you make yourself, part of your team at Harvard, where you place a significant emphasis on the cognitive development of the interventional endoscopy trainee? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So, we have several conferences throughout the year. So I think that we have an endoscopy conference every week. And there's didactics to make sure that, the faculty are lecturing so that the fellows and the advanced fellow can be educated, which is nice. And you have several advanced faculty. And we all are very subspecialized. So we have Hiro Aihara, who's really subspecialized in ESD, right? He's a colorectal surgeon, but he's a gastroenterologist here, and he works within GI and within endoscopy. He doesn't do surgery anymore. He's one of our faculty, and he can teach from a different perspective, right? And then we have Marvin Yu, who's really been driving the endohepatology field forward, amongst other things. And besides Europino with the bariatrics and kind of combination of endohepatology and bariatrics and medical management obesity. And Linda Lee was all about pancreatic cysts and the therapeutic EUS and chronalgiogio and et cetera. So we have a very diverse faculty in many ways that educate the fellow through these didactics. But then the fellows are also required to give lectures. And I think that's great because when you prepare to give a lecture, you learn it much more thoroughly, I believe. So they give lectures back to the faculty as well as to the junior fellows. And that's fantastic. They also run the M&M for us. And they also do a case conference that they run as well. So I think that makes sure that they're getting, didactics and making sure that we get kind of a structured cognitive training as part of the fellowship.
Very important, and makes them more complete physicians and help them take better care of their patients. So this is all great, and in the time that we have left, I have a few more questions. So maybe I'll do them a little bit more rapid fire style, which you and I are both used to. So research should be part of this training, mandatory, you think? There's about 75, 80 programs out there. Not everybody is emphasizing research at those places. Do you think that should be a part of this?
I do think it should be mandatory. I mean, the whole point of this is to make the field better and make sure it keeps growing. And one of the best ways to do that is with research. So I do think research should definitely be part of it. And at some level, you have to.
I feel one big project and one small project probably it should be an expectation. And so 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, how many years should be advanced endoscopy training? I know that's one of your favorite topics.
That's one of my topics. I want to completely restructure endoscopic training, right? I think endoscopy should be its own specialty, or even subspecialty in medicine, but maybe its own specialty where you do 2 years of a preliminary program, 2 years of surgery, 2 years of medicine, then you go directly into endoscopy training and you do endoscopy for 3 years. And I think in 5 years, you come out bulletproof and you can do all the procedures. And other countries like in Brazil and a little bit in Japan and other places, they already are kind of doing this. And I think we're way behind the times making people do 3 years of medicine and 3 years of GI, where, I mean, when you're a therapeutic endoscopist, you don't, if you're doing POEM and ESD and you're doing all these other therapeutic EUS, you don't have time to do IBD. You don't have time to do hepatology, right? And so why don't we spend more of our time training on what we're ultimately going to be doing? So I think it's really important.
I think the long view is what, you and I both serve on the ASG task force that is trying to figure this out. And certification is a big part of it, which is probably a secondary thing once we figure out what the final models will be, right? So I do believe that I think the 1 year construct is good for a couple, 3 skills. The 1 year will not let you become an interventional pancreatic biliary and a bariatric and a third space and so forth. So I think we all recognize that. But this is an area of evolution, and hopefully we will move in the right direction with that and maybe get some level of certification, which probably will become important as the field becomes more evolved, which is the way cardiology went and other services went as well. Medical legal risk comes up for young advanced endoscopists, right? Some are more worried about it, some are more attuned to it, others are not. What's your advice around staying outside the courtroom? Are there any top 3 tips you can give advanced endoscopy trainees and young faculty of how to avoid negative outcomes and litigation best they can?
Well, I think if you're trying to be too careful, a lot of times it leads you to more problems, right? Do what you've
Good
been
point.
trained to do. Do what you've
Good
been
point.
trained to do. It doesn't, what I don't want is a fellow to go out and then immediately start thinking, I'm going to do everything differently than I was trained, because there's a
Right.
reason why we trained them a certain way, right?
Right.
So it's
Right.
okay to be creative, but maybe not your first couple of years. Just go out and
Right.
do what you're trained to do. Don't
Right.
take your foot off the gas pedal, but
Right.
I think that's important. That's number one. Because even with VIPs, you start to treat them differently, and
Correct.
it's like they're more likely to have a problem. So
Absolutely.
being cautious, just like driving too slowly, being too cautious leads to problems. So do the right
Absolutely.
thing. Do what you're trained to do. Number one. Number two, make sure there's a good indication for the procedure. Right.
Absolutely.
Right. That's the most important thing. You don't want to do a procedure that's not indicated. Right. So I think
Absolutely.
that's an issue as well. Number three,
Yeah.
I think that since you say three, I think one thing is, if you really if you join a program that already has kind of more senior people there,
Right.
kind of
Right.
rely on them a little bit to help you out, and
Yeah. Quick.
do the harder procedures when they're around to provide backup.
Absolutely correct. And that last point is so important. First of all, everyone should be lucky enough to enter a unit, whether it's private practice or academics, it doesn't matter, where you have collegiality, where you have some degree of, maybe not a mentor-like person behind your back, but somebody that you can call into the room. And those units do better where they have an atmosphere and an ambience where, it's not about you, it's about the patient, and getting the job done right. The other thing I always talk about is guideline-based interventions. And I think as long as you're proceeding, and that falls along the lines of indications, indications, guideline-based interventions, and then complications will occur. And that's not a poor reflection on you. That's just the nature of the beast. And then how you manage those complications is where the law looks at. They look at how you deal with a problem rather than whether or not you had a problem.
Very
Uh,
true. Real important to see that family afterwards. Yeah.
right? And then go to see them. There's always a family in the waiting room and all of that stuff. A big other question comes up around wellness and work-life integration. The jobs we do are not easy. After a quarter century in this, we all have our own opinions about it. How do you balance your life, Chris? And what do you suggest people do looking back? What should they do to stay sane and stay healthy?
I might not be the best mentor in that regard.
That's why I'm asking you. No, you are the best because
Great.
you're still here and you're thriving, and you're the best guy to ask this. What should people do? Eat well, go to the gym,
Oh, yeah, no,
classical
absolutely.
music.
Yeah, no,
What?
I've actually prescribed certain trainees to go to the gym, because
There you go.
I was worried they'd have ergonomic issues and
Right,
work injuries,
right,
because they needed to put a little more muscle on. So I
right,
think it's very important to stay fit, right?
right.
And resistance training, strength training is
Yeah,
incredibly important. I mean, they could run a marathon, that's fine, but that's not what I'm interested in. I want them to build their muscles so that they can enjoy this career for a long period of time. And some of my older mentors, um, really, they had like shoulders and hips done, right? When I
right,
was coming
right,
into training back
right,
in the day when they wore really heavy lead, and I was like, ooh,
right.
better exercise. So I agree with that. And so I think physical health is really important. And you have to have a good diet too. I mean, nowadays we know what's healthy for us, right? And so you have to maintain a good diet. And I think that from a mental health standpoint, you got to be able to decompress, and you need time for creativity, right? So I tell people, not all about the money. You're going to find ways of making money. I mean, and I think that in Harvard in particular, we're encouraged to make our money outside of the institution, right? So basically by doing startup companies and
Right,
being creative, they think
right.
that also helps drive the field forward, which I think is a very unique perspective, and I do like it. But I think if you have the ability to take a little time, have a protected time, I would take that, rather than all the money up front if you can do so. Just because with that protected time, that's the time you have for creativity, right?
I
And that's
completely
when you
agree
can
with
write
that.
grants, right? Yeah.
Completely agree with that. I think there has to be a balance between your time and the financial incentives that are at stake, particularly from an employment contract. Because remember that if you do well, and certainly in either sector, if you do well, you'll have the opportunity to legally, in kosher ways, monetize your skill sets well beyond your imagination. So, and it won't all be in the same way. It'll be in different ways, which brings a different kind of gratification than just doing 18, 19-hour workdays. The other thing that I feel is being part of a good team allows you that time to be away and do your thing while somebody else's turn to take that week, and you're not the one man army that you didn't intend to be. So I think that's another career advice we want to give when people are looking
Great
at
point.
job opportunities, right? Final couple of
Absolutely.
minutes, Chris, advice for new mentors, advice for new mentees. I know you've covered a lot of that. Anything comes to mind at top things?
Um, well, I think that, one thing is you have to share. You don't want to be selfish, right? In anything that you're doing, you have to share, right? So,
Right,
like in building a division, when you're mentoring colleagues as well, right? You have to
right,
make sure you give. So,
right,
it's easy for me to want to do everything, Oh,
right,
I want to do colon ESD and endohepatology and everything every time there's a new gizmo, right?
right,
But honestly, it's better to help build and more fulfilling. Yeah,
right,
honestly, more fulfilling to help build your colleagues' careers, right?
right,
And
right,
I think that's great. And then you do get this stable team
right.
around you. And then when you're a team, you can take on
Uh,
anything.
a lot of adversity. That's very important. I think sharing knowledge is a paradigm that is not universally applied. Every time, and we've been doing EUS is a great example because EUS mushroomed, in communities in front of our eyes. And every time there was a new kid in town who wanted to do EUS or in the community or in the larger 200-mile radius, people used to come and say to me, well, there's this other advanced person who's come in. I said, welcome. I'd pick up the phone and call them and say, we're here. Can we do something to work together? And I've never had a problem. We're busier now than we ever were. And I think, and the same applies with your surgical colleagues are seeking new innovation or help in training. People from outside want to come. Anytime that your skill sets are up for grabs, I think you're better off sharing them in a structured way rather than hiding and being selfish. I think that has served me well, and obviously looks like it served you well. I think it's an important tenet, and that is the basis for the ECHO project, which has been so successful worldwide in democratizing knowledge, and that's an important caveat. So with that, Chris, I have to ask you, after all this, what does the future hold for Chris Thompson?
Well, I mean, I love what I'm doing. It's kind of like a perfect job. So, but you always want to keep growing, right? So, what I think I'm going to do is continue working in my same role and doing what I love, but I think maybe shift to spend a little more time doing the entrepreneurial activities because,
Yeah,
we've started several companies that have spun out of the lab now, and I think that it's really great fun to watch them grow and develop. And I like spending time in those, kind of with those companies as the technology develops. So maybe shift a little time into that. We have a company called Barry Endo, which is kind of very interesting now as well, which is a healthcare delivery platform. So all my companies up till now have been, medical devices that we've worked on. So this is different. It's a, kind of virtual healthcare delivery platform,
right,
and we're actually building, it's kind of there's different ways to describe it. It could be like an Uber for doctors, like for bariatric
yeah,
endoscopists, where we're offering kind of bariatric endoscopists kind of part-time positions where they can actually provide these procedures and do ESGs and balloons at very high volume, which is quite
right,
nice because the platform takes care of everything from patient intake to financing the procedures for the patients, et cetera. So that requires us to build these out in different states. So right now we have
sure,
a few sites in Florida, and we're putting them in New York and Chicago and the West Coast. And so you have to spend a little more time kind of traveling and getting those off the ground. That's different because it's kind of like privatizing the training model as well, because in
yeah,
many cases we're training these physicians, instead of in the academic environment, we're training them in that private environment. So it's kind of interesting,
sure,
right? So, and it solves some of the problems with bariatric endoscopy, right? So bariatric endoscopy, I've trained 30 people to do bariatric endoscopy now, right? And many have been successful, but many have not been. They go off into their academic environment, and they don't get the support they need. They can't build a multidisciplinary team around them. They don't
right,
have the ability to get financing done in an academic environment, and they want to charge way too much for the procedures.
right,
This
right,
solves all that, right? So what it allows them to do is work part-time here, where all that we have a multidisciplinary team, of
right,
psychologists and nurses and dietitians and PAs and whatever. And we have the financing bit. Everything's taken care of. They just have to, meet the patients and do the procedures. So I think that really that solves it. And I think that was the one thing is really being able to democratize bariatric endoscopy and kind of allow it to disseminate. And that's the one thing that's been holding it back, I think. And it's got to get outside the academic center. So that's one thing I'm spending more time with, is kind of fulfilling and enjoyable.
So it's great, and it's gratifying to take your expertise to the next level, where you provide sort of a home for a technology, for a skill set, and also at the same time address some of the barriers that have plagued it in the traditional model. I wish you all the best, Chris. I know you and I will continue to work on many of these things offline, including with the journal and with the ASGE. But I feel that the questions we covered today, I'm very hopeful, and I think you'll agree, will address some of the normal standard questions that we encounter when we are talking to people in the community who are either contemplating this career path or are already fully immersed in it. So I wish to thank you very much from my side, as well as from the journal, and I hope to talk to you again around these topics. Thanks again.
You bet. Thank you.
Bye-bye.